I'm Jasmine Moulton, and this is Reality Check. Reality Check is a new show here at True North where we use facts to debunk the favorite arguments of the left. If you're new to the show, some past episodes include us debunking leftist ideas such as the rich don't pay their fair share or Canada has the best healthcare system in the world. Reality Check. The rich pay the majority of taxes in Canada, and our healthcare system, even though it's one of the most expensive, performs amongst the worst of other universal healthcare systems. Now, while the legacy media gives leftists a platform to spread these ideological claims, Reality Check is the only show in Canada with the explicit purpose of pushing back against these baseless claims. So if you enjoy the show and you think that it's important for other Canadians to hear the facts, then please consider supporting True North. You can donate at donate.tnc.news. Now to this week's show. Back to school season is amongst us. It's fall in Canada, but before the students even hear that first recess bell ring, you're going to hear Canadian politicians, specifically leftist politicians, calling for free tuition in Canada. The idea of free tuition has infected the Canadian political discourse coming from the United States, specifically from politicians such as AOC, Bernie Sanders, and specifically in Canada, this idea has really taken off amongst the New Democratic Party, the NDP federally, and also the Greens. Take a listen.
From kindergarten to post-secondary, barrier-free, free tuition. That's what we believe in. We would immediately and permanently remove all interest from federal student debt for all students. And for students in need, we would make sure that we forgive student debt.
The Green Party is very clear on this. Education at the post-secondary level, like from kindergarten to 12, should be free.
Will the government make tuition-free post-secondary education a pillar of the post-COVID recovery plan?
By announcing that the Ontario Greens are committed to providing free tuition for 60,000 young people.
Free tuition. This is something that sounds like it might be out of reach, but it's not.
So if you're not watching this clip on YouTube, that was Jagmeet Singh, the federal NDP leader. That was a number of different Green Party leaders. Federally, that was members of parliament and members of provincial parliament, all from this NDP Green Party camp, all calling for free tuition in Canada. Of course, free tuition is an issue that's been taken up by student unions in Canada, including the Canadian Federation of Students, CFS, but clearly this issue is not relegated to just the university campus. It's been taken up by federal and provincial politicians as well. The left has three main arguments why they think tuition should be free in Canada. One, because the cost of tuition prevents people from going to post-secondary. Two, because it would provide an economic benefit to Canada. And three, it's an equity issue. So let's start off by debunking argument number one, that the cost of tuition is the reason why people don't go to post-secondary in Canada. First, we need to address the idea that tuition is not free in Canada. Yes, when you go to post-secondary, you will pay tuition or fees. But what you may not know is that the vast majority of universities' revenue does not come from your tuition dollars. You might have in your head that my tuition covers 100% of my educational expenses, but that is not the case. According to Statistics Canada, tuition makes up less than 1/3 of universities' total revenue. It's about 29%. That means that 71% of the money that universities get every year comes from other sources that aren't tuition. For example, provincial governments are actually the largest funder of post-secondary institutions, and they cover a bigger portion of the revenue that universities take every year, more than what your tuition covers. My point is that while university is not free in Canada, it is heavily subsidized to the tune of more than 2/3. Moving on. If it is true that the cost of tuition is the reason why people aren't going to school, costly tuition is preventing them from going to post-secondary, then you would think that comparing Canada, where you do pay at least a portion of your tuition, that Canada would have lower rates of post-secondary attendance than other countries where tuition is free. But this is not the case. An OECD report shows that Canada consistently ranks as one of the most educated countries in the entire world. What the most recent OECD report shows is that in Canada, 64% of 25 to 34-year-olds have completed tertiary education, which means basically professional or vocational programs after high school. So that's 64% in Canada. That's higher than countries with free tuition, such as France, which is at 49%, Denmark, 47%, Finland, 45%, and Germany, which offers free tuition and is only at 35%, which is almost half the rate of Canadian 25 to 34-year-olds who have completed tertiary education. This stat alone should clearly debunk the idea that people in Canada are not going to school because of the cost of tuition. The Montreal Economic Institute also puts out a report that really corroborates these findings from the OECD report. What they found is that Quebec has some of the lowest costs of tuition anywhere in Canada, yet their attendance at post-secondary is much lower than provinces such as Ontario or Nova Scotia that have much costlier tuition. So clearly there must be other factors at play that influence a person's decision of whether or not to go to post-secondary, aside from just the cost of tuition. But we'll get to that later. While we're on the topic of costs, let's take a quick look at the NDP's website. On its page about students, it says, young people shouldn't start out with a mountain of debt. Let's dive in. StatsCan says that the average student loan upon graduation with a bachelor's degree is about $28,000. So if leftists agree that this sum of $28,000 is unacceptable for young people to start out with, then it's odd that they're so silent on the issue of government debt. Every single Canadian's individual portion of the federal debt is approximately $32,500. But your share of government debt doesn't stop there. If you live in the province of Ontario, your individual portion of government debt in the province is about $31,300. So when you combine those numbers, your debt from the federal government and your portion of debt from the provincial government, every single Ontarian owes $64,000 in government debt. Of course, you'll repay this as a future tax liability. So it is a bit odd that leftists take issue with someone who's decided to take a bachelor's degree, graduating with an average debt load of $28,000, yet they're pretty quiet about every single baby being born in Ontario already owing $64,000 worth of government debt for services that he or she hasn't even used. So to conclude, if leftist politicians actually cared about young people starting out with a mountain of debt, the first thing they should do is balance their budget. Let's move on to debunk the leftist second argument in favor of free tuition, which is that it would provide an economic benefit to Canada. So first of all, let's just start by agreeing with the basic fact that income does correlate with the decision to attend and complete university. On average, university completion does correlate with higher incomes, more stable employment, etc. This should be obvious because a lot of professional programs, for example, with really high earners in the medical field, law, business, all of them have had to complete professional degrees to work in that profession. But it doesn't always follow that the decision to get a university degree provides a good return on investment. For example, an OECD report found that 36% of Canadian adults were working in a field different from the one in which they studied. So immediately from that statistic, it should be clear that Canadians aren't always using their degree after they finish school. In a world where taxpayers are picking up the entire freight and the entire cost of that degree, it's unclear how they're going to get a return on that investment. Now, a common theme on Reality Check on this show, if you've been watching all past episodes, is that you have to look at opportunity costs. When you're making a decision or an argument to spend money in one area, saying it will spur these economic benefits, you always have to show how those benefits outweigh the costs of wherever you're taking the money from. If you're going to take money out of taxpayers' pockets, out of the economy to fund free tuition for Canadian students, you have to demonstrate how that is better than leaving the money where it was. And a quick look at some courses on offer across the country might have you a little bit skeptical. Here are some courses currently on offer at the University of Toronto: The Politics of Girlhood, Drunk History, Lesbian Studies, The Yard, Microgeographies of Household Outdoor Spaces, Sexuality and Disability, Fake SHIT in History, The Beatles, and last but not least, Goddess Lessons, Gender, Religion, and Pop. Now, the course description for this last class, Goddess Lessons, includes asking questions such as, what does it mean to follow lesbian Jesus, end quote. A couple things. It's unclear how any of these courses are preparing the next generation for the job market, but also it's highly questionable that any of the content in these courses would spur economic growth. For an arts degree at the University of Toronto, tuition on average for the first year of your bachelor's degree is about $6,100. Now, assuming you take 10 courses, 5 in the fall semester, 5 in the winter, that means that your tuition per course is about $610. Keep in mind, as I said, tuition in Canada is heavily subsidized to the tune of about 2/3. So that's about $1,800 that the course is going to cost to administer. You only cover, as a student, about $610 of that. But if we eliminated tuition, as the leftists suggest we should do, the actual cost of this program to administer each course would be about $1,800. That's $1,800 per student in the class drunk history or lesbian studies for every single student to take this class. Or one of my personal favorites, deconstructing Drake and the Weekend, which is a course offered at Ryerson. So it really should be up to leftists arguing in favor of free tuition to demonstrate how any of these courses will contribute to the economic betterment of Canada. Finally, let's move on to the leftist third and final argument in favor of free tuition, which is that it increases equity in Canada. Equity is different from equality. Equality says we should treat everybody the same. Equity says that we have to recognize that people start in different places, and so we have to treat them differently to try and level the playing field. Presumably, when leftists apply this equity lens to the tuition debate, they're saying that people don't always start in the same place financially, so we have to help lower income people make that leap into post-secondary by covering the cost of their tuition. But a universal free tuition policy does the exact opposite of that. In fact, free tuition policy is often defined as a regressive one. The opposite of progressive, it's regressive because it helps the rich people in Canada a lot more than it would help the actual poor. As Tristan Hopper points out in a National Post column, according to Statistics Canada, nearly 80% of children from the richest fifth of Canadian households go to post-secondary education. Among children from the bottom fifth, the rate is less than 50%. So by eliminating tuition fees, the benefits would disproportionately accrue to the wealthy Canadians already sending their kids to university. And this really seems to be a common theme on this show, Reality Check, is questioning why leftists, when they claim to want to help the most vulnerable in society or the lowest income, why they always insist on these grand universal programs that pay for everything for everyone, even the rich who don't need the help. Why not just focus your efforts on those who actually need it? Now, one of the weirder claims that I found from the left regarding this issue of free tuition comes from the Green Party of Canada. On their website, it states, and I quote, "Students are one of the most disadvantaged groups in society," end quote. A Canadian student is in an incredible position of privilege. And this statement by the left is contradictory in itself, because if they're saying that access to education is the path out of poverty and a path to self-betterment and higher earning potential, then it's unclear why they would suggest that a student is so disadvantaged. And if there is a genuine concern for equity here, then it's really questionable why they would suggest that people who haven't had the opportunity or perhaps the inclination to attend a post-secondary institution, why they should be saddled with the cost of sending someone else to. As Norma Kazaya from the Montreal Economic Institute said, "By broadly subsidizing higher education more heavily, the average taxpayer is in effect financing the high salary earners of tomorrow. It should be asked if this is fair for people who do not benefit from university to contribute to its financing to this extent." But ultimately, painting the cost of tuition as an equity issue fundamentally misunderstands the reason why people choose not to attend post-secondary. As University of Ottawa economist Ross Finney points out, cultural factors are a more relevant predictor of one's decision whether or not to attend post-secondary. Corroborating these findings, Kelly Foley, who's an economic professor from the University of Saskatchewan, points out, quote, "Research suggests that before students ever reach the barriers posed by the costs of applying for and enrolling in university, disadvantage and less skills investment in early childhood can represent a brick wall. Thus, the link between family income and university enrollment is largely, though not entirely, driven by factors that wouldn't be ameliorated by making university free." So in conclusion, eliminating the cost of tuition for Canadians would not eliminate the underlying factors that influence why individuals choose to or to not attend post-secondary in Canada. So as a quick recap of the arguments that we presented on today's show, when you hear leftists say that tuition in Canada should be free, you can easily shut down that argument with the following three facts. 1, Canada's already the most educated country in the world, even more so than countries with free tuition. And 2, nothing's free. It comes from taxpayers who, in this case, are getting a terrible return on investment. 3, free tuition is a regressive policy that benefits affluent students at the expense of those who didn't go to university. So here's your reality check. The idea of free tuition in Canada is a dumb policy. Most likely, it's just a strategy to motivate the youth vote. And finally, politicians have run up debts on our behalf that we're going to have to pay off that are way bigger than the average student loan. So if anything, these politicians should really stop spending and take a class on how to balance a budget. That's our show for this week. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you liked what you heard, please share the show with a friend so that they can discover Reality Check too. And don't forget to tune in next Wednesday as we'll be dropping another episode. Thanks so much. I'm Jasmine Moulton.